Okay, so that's a very easy 5-marker done, and let's move on to the 8-mark question. So what is the 8-mark question saying? So with reference to the information provided, so of course application marks, this is 8 marks of course. With the reference to information provided and your own knowledge, examine 2 factors. So we want 2 factors, so that's going to be 2K paragraphs here, or 2 paragraphs, which might explain the change in the rate of Eurozone inflation, to change the rate of Eurozone inflation as shown in figure 2. In figure 2, what does it show? A change in inflation. So there's a decrease, so there's disinflation basically. So from 2011 2015 there has been disinflation, or just a decrease in inflation rate. So we need to give 2 reasons, 2 factors which might explain the change in the rate of Eurozone inflation. And now figure 1 doesn't tell us much. Figure 1 tells us the price of the euro relative to the pound, and we found out that it's depreciated 21%, but that could be either pound appreciating or it could be the euro depreciating. It doesn't give us so it could be either one of them. It could be both. It could be a combination of both. It likely is a combination of both, but that could be the pound appreciating or the euro depreciating, but we don't know, so that doesn't give us any conclusive bit to talk about. This just tells us that it's disinflation, so I'm probably going to have to use extract A here. What does extract A start with? Alright, so European Central Bank disappoints markets with a weaker than expected stimulus. So that looks quite good, to be honest. So just the title itself. So if the markets are disappointed, what does that make me think of? It makes me think of animal spirits, consumer confidence, things like that. And that is definitely one point I can write about, but if there's a bit more of a solid point, I will probably pick it out. Okay, so I've had a read through this paragraph. There's not much in this. It just talks about interest rates, quantitative easing, a bit of asset prices. So that is probably going to be my first paragraph point, and this is probably a bit of a tricky 8-mark question. But for my second paragraph, because it says state 2 reasons, I'm probably going to use this part of it. There's quite a few decent evaluation points in this, but here, so it says the euro rose almost 3% against the dollar, and I think that's a really good second reason. So another reason why we might there might be disinflation basically is due to appreciation of the euro compared to other currencies. Okay, so let's get on with answering this. So the 8-mark question. Okay, so since it's mainly about inflation, I'd start with defining inflation, which is just a sustained increase in general price level. And since I'm going to quote the extract, so I'm going to quote figure 2, I'm just going to throw another definition in here, which is disinflation, because I'm going to refer to this figure 2, and I'm going to say that since 2011, the Eurozone has suffered a disinflation. Okay, so my first factor is going to be a decrease in consumer / investor, and I'd call that animal spirits, but decrease in consumer / investor confidence. So I'd probably back that up by just literally quoting the extract. So I'd say something like, one reason there has been disinflation in the Eurozone is due to a decrease in consumer and investor confidence. For example, just quote the extract. So in extract A it says, the markets are disappointed with a weaker stimulus than expected. With reduced consumer confidence and reduced investor confidence, this is going to lead to a decrease in consumption and investment, which are both components of AD, and consumption makes up about 60% of AD, which is a significant proportion of AD, meaning that this is going to cause, if we look at AD, and I would actually draw a diagram here because it's very fast and simple, so this is going to cause AD to shift in to AD1. And when AD shifts into AD1, this means price level is decreasing from PLE to PL1, thus meaning that this leads to a decrease in inflation rate or disinflation, which could be one reason why the Eurozone is suffering from deflation or disinflation. And that's pretty much only because, remember, you're doing 2 different reasons here, and it's only 8 marks. That's all. That is more than enough depth with regards to that. Just make sure for your 8-mark question, classic mistake I see students make sure you include an evaluation point, because there's obviously 2 marks here reserved for evaluation. And like I said before, I was looking at the context earlier, you can use the several different valuation points you can use there. Depends on the proportion of AD affected, depends on the level of consumer confidence decrease, investor confidence decrease, as if it decreases a bit, it's obviously going to have a different effect on AD. So if it decreases slightly, price level is only going to decrease slightly. If it's a massive change, obviously, but price level is going to change massively. But a really good one point here, and I'll use this because it's the extract, is the economists reduced inflation rate, but basically they expect inflation rate to rise in 2017. So you could say, however, this depends on the long run, as economists expect inflation rate to rise to 1.6% in 2017. And that is all I'd write for this first paragraph, and then my second paragraph, like I've written here, would be due to the appreciation of the euro. And I do understand this question, 8 marks, is because it's asking you to examine two factors which might explain. It's again a bit of an inference. You have to kind of think of them yourself. You have to really drag it out the extract. I do understand they can be a bit difficult sometimes. And of course, with that first paragraph also, or even with the second paragraph, there is, remember, 2 marks here reserved for application. Since I'm just verbally saying it, I'm not going to say it, but if I was writing this, I would 100% in one or two of the, or both paragraphs, whenever you talk about disinflation, just quote one of the figures to say, for example, this disinflation occurred from 2011-2015, where inflation rate fell from 3.1 to 0.25, whatever you want to say. Just basically quote the extracts to pick up those 2 application marks. So how does an appreciation of the euro lead to basically disinflation? So I would use the good old acronym of SPICY. Of course, this is not pound, it's euros now. So stronger euro, imports cheaper, exports expensive. So I'd pretty much say an appreciation of the euro, since imports are cheaper, exports are more expensive, I would just focus on exports. When you have an appreciation of the euro, the exports are more expensive, thus meaning our exports are less competitive on global markets, meaning it decreases export revenue, so that there's less sales of exports. If there's less sales of exports, if we're getting less export revenue, if we think about our AD formula, which is C plus I plus G plus X minus M, so there's less X, which is less X, which is exports, meaning that this is going to cause, if there's less X, this means there's less AD. So there's less AD, and well, that's basically again showing the same thing. AD shifts in, thus leading to a decrease in price level, thus causing a disinflation, which is happening in the Eurozone. And if you want to evaluate this, obviously there's 2 marks of evaluation. You probably have done enough in the first bit, but maybe didn't evaluate in your first paragraph. You can say, however, this depends on the level of imported inflation. As imports are cheaper now with the appreciation of the euro, it means we're going to import more. There's more import expenditure, meaning that, of course, one big thing with imports is you import the inflation as well, basically. So, for example, if the price of grapes are increasing rapidly and you're importing grapes, you're importing a bit of that inflation. So, basically the way I'd word it. However, it depends on the level of imported inflation, as in the long run it could mean that imported inflation could rise the Eurozone inflation rates. But that is a very simple summary on the 8-mark question. Like I said, independently it might be a bit difficult to answer, but you have to kind of get used to these questions with Edexcel. They do like to really, since this is pretty much your all knowledge question. And one thing to mention here, since this is a 2017 paper, and depending on when you are answering this, a lot of the factors, I've just showed the mark scheme now, let me just have a look at it. So the mark scheme here, it says a few of the points like falling oil prices, falling commodity prices. If you didn't get them, I wouldn't be too worried. This is why I focus a bit more on the extract rather than points, because remember, this came out in 2017, and around that time is when oil prices were falling, commodity prices were falling. So if you were sitting the paper around that time, you should have known that oil prices were falling and commodity prices falling, thus meaning that you probably would have written something like that. But now, since if you're doing it for practice as a past paper, the first thing that comes to your mind is probably not oil prices falling, since oil prices are spiking massively right now. So don't worry too much about the mark scheme points. This is why I try to deduce the points from the extract, so you guys can actually replicate that, and it means that it's something that you can actually do yourself. So what I'm saying there, don't worry too much about the mark scheme points, since if you were sitting in that year, you probably would have written those points as well, since it was topical back then, and right now obviously falling oil prices isn't very topical.